play on the field, the courts, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and promoters who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go behind the game with Patrick Klinger and Bill Robertson. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Game. I'm Patrick Klinger. To my left is my wingman, my dear friend, and the Commissioner of the Western Collegiate Hockey Association, Bill Robertson. Hey, Bill.
Good afternoon, Patrick. Thanks everybody. Happy holidays to all. Our guest today is a longtime coach, longtime sports administrator, the former athletic director at the University of Minnesota. He does a lot for so many people in this community, has done so much for the world of collegiate athletics. Mr. Joel Maturi. Welcome, Joel.
Good to be here. Honored to be a part of this. Thank you.
A lot of fun, and happy holidays to you.
To you as well.
We'll get right into the questions. Since you've retired as the athletic director at the University of Minnesota, what have you been up to so all our listeners and viewers will know exactly what you're doing these days?
Well, it's been a good journey for me. I've been truly blessed. I think I'm a better husband, certainly a better grandfather than I was a father, which is a joy, and anybody who's a grandparent out there knows what I'm saying. But I'm also still very, very active. I'm honored to be a part of the NCAA Infractions Committee, which is a lot of work. It's not paid work, but it's a lot of work, and I'm honored to be asked to try to do what we can to keep the integrity of sports at the collegiate level in line. I'm very involved with the Positive Coaching Alliance here in Minnesota. I'm on the board and do several of their workshops, which again I think is needed, the good sportsmanship with youth sports in our communities and in America. I'm also leading the Minnesota High School Basketball Hall of Fame Committee, and we're very active with that. We had our first induction a year ago. Patrick is very much involved. We're very thankful for his efforts and assistance, and we're going to have our second induction this coming March to honor former players, former coaches, and others who have meant a lot to the sport of basketball. And I continue to be a great Gopher fan. I still go to everything and cheer for the maroon and gold.
Joe, the world of collegiate athletics has changed pretty immensely over the last couple of years. It's become more of a business than it ever has. What do you think of the state of collegiate athletics today?
Well, we know each other pretty well, and I'm one of those guys, the glass is half full, not half empty. And I think if you really look at the big picture of college sports, it's really in a good state. That commercial that the NCAA does, it's something to the effect that there's 400,000 athletes and most of them go pro in something other than sports, is very, very accurate. And for the great majority of our student athletes, they do come to our institutions, receive an outstanding education, work hard to be as good as they can be at their particular sport. Oftentimes they're very successful. Certainly Gophers are emblematic of that, and move on in life and hopefully are good representatives of our community. Money has created many problems in college sports in my mind. It's helped solve some of the problems too, ironically. But I'm concerned. I'm concerned about the movement of pay for play. I'm concerned about the movement of the arms race that we obviously are in the midst of, the salaries of coaches, which brings, I think, a negativity to many people, which therefore leads to the increase in ticket prices, the demand of sponsorships, and quite frankly, we all want to win, and when you keep score, you try to win, but the demands to winning, and really measured only on winning and losing, not on some of the things that I think we're supposed to do with the amateur model.
As a sidebar to that answer, that you're seeing all the time now, that a lot of student athletes are ducking out of the bowl games, and I believe this will spill into other sports such as basketball, hockey, baseball, the College World Series, the NCAA hockey tournament. What is your opinion of all that? I mean, I always believe that was you're with that team, and now you're letting your teammates down and your coaches and your school down to leave because you think you may have a better possibility or to go pro, and you won't get hurt.
Well, you and I are old school, and so we think similarly in that regard. But I think, as Patrick mentioned earlier, the game has changed. It's a different world. I think we have agents. There's so much money involved. The risk of being hurt and not getting drafted where that young person thinks he might get drafted has changed, and that's the mindset. I wish it didn't happen, but I'm not going to be critical of it because each individual has their own story and their own reasons for it. I think it's unfortunate. I don't think it's healthy. I think it may lead to the change in the college football playoff, whether it be the addition of adding teams, whether it be change in the bowl structure to make things significantly more important. Some of the greater players are playing in the college football playoff series. None of them are leaving for particular reasons. And some people feared this. They feared this, that the bowls would not have the significance, that they once had once the college football playoff was created. And so there's pluses and minuses as to what happens here.
One of the biggest and probably toughest responsibilities of being an athletic director is hiring and firing coaches. The role of a collegiate coach is unique because not only do you have to win games, but you're expected to graduate students as well. So when you're in the process of trying to hire a coach, Joel, how did you balance that? And how did you evaluate sometimes coaches who maybe were successful on the field but weren't doing as well with getting their kids through the classroom?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think every athletic director would answer that a little bit differently. I've always believed in what I call a fit. I just think that each culture is a little bit different at each institution for several reasons. Minnesota has its own particular culture. Better for some, not so good for others. And I think you did your best to try to bring in people that fit that culture, understood who you were. And if I may, and I know we're time stringent here, but I can tell you a story. Even when I ended up hiring Jerry Kill, I interviewed a couple of coaches who, quite frankly, were probably better known than he, who in some instances ended up at Power 5 schools afterwards. And in one instance, one of the interviews that I took part in, I had known this coach's compliance officer, for example. And remember, Minnesota's had some history with violations, and we don't want to go down that path. And so I asked this coach how this compliance director was, and his response was, "I don't speak to him." I go, "Whoa." And he didn't speak to him because that compliance director had turned him in for a secondary violation, and this coach was upset about it. Now, rightly or wrongly, I crossed him off the list. Had nothing to do with football. Some people might look at me and say that not a right decision on my part, and I respect that, but I didn't think it was best for the Minnesota culture. I interviewed another coach for football at that same year, who I was proud to tell him how we had merged the departments here at the University of Minnesota. That when I arrived, we were two departments, we had come together, and so many positive things I think have been a result of that. And I said, I'm an early workout guy. I'd go for my jog, I'd get into the weight room, and I'd look down there, and I'd see the football team over here, and I'd see the women's track team over here, and he'd say, "Whoa, not going to be any women in my weight room." Rightly or wrongly, I crossed him off the list. Had nothing to do with the football. Okay, I'm not saying this coach is not a good person. I didn't think he fit the culture of the University of Minnesota. And again, other people may disagree, and I'm respectful of that. So I think the fit is really important. You obviously have to assume that they know the game. You have to assume that they bring strengths to you that somebody else did not have. I'll be very open about here. I hired 15 to 20 coaches during my time at the University of Minnesota, and I think almost all of them were successful, except for certainly one, which is, in many people's case, my legacy, in hiring Tim Brewster. I hired Tim because he was known as the best recruiter in America, and I just felt that we needed to upgrade the level of talent at the University of Minnesota. Unfortunately, I think it's shown that the coach was not yet ready to be a head coach, certainly not a head coach at the University of Minnesota. It didn't work. It was not a good hire. Put it on my shoulders. It's something that happens. So there's no guarantees on who you hire and why you hire them, but most importantly, I think there needs to be a fit. Tim was very good in assisting us in raising money for the stadium, rightly or wrongly. He was a salesman, as everybody will know, and he did do some of those kind of things. And if you go back, he still has the highest recruiting class that we've ever had. Didn't turn into some of the wins we'd like to, but they were ranked the highest. So he had some strengths, but it didn't work out.
Well, you did such a good job of hiring coaches in what we call the non-revenues, so to speak, sports, but the Olympic-type sports, and you did marvelous things. And one of the things is you're known as a tireless worker throughout the industry. Everybody I've ever talked to says that in a very positive way. And you attended so many events on campus, sports, both men's and women's. Why did you put such a premium on that when there are a lot of athletic directors who will stay with their top revenue sports, football and basketball, and maybe hockey for that matter?
Well, I think it's an easy answer back to 2002 when I arrived. Again, we were merging two departments. Before my arrival, we had a women's athletic director, we had a men's athletic director, and I'm the first athletic director of the men and the women. And in my that I could just concentrate on the revenue sports of football, men's basketball, and men's hockey, and ignore not only the Olympic sports on the men's side, but certainly the sports on the women's side. I couldn't do that. That's not what I was hired to do. Fortunately for me, it's in my DNA to go at everything because I enjoy competition. I enjoy the women on the balance beam, and I enjoy the shot putters in the track, and I do enjoy all the sports. So it was not hard for me to do that. But I did it because I think I was hired to do that. Again, a quick story. I remember being at a basketball game. It was a Saturday afternoon. We were playing Michigan State. And I left at halftime to go across the street to go to the aquatic center where we had a swim meet. I think it was between the Gophers, Wisconsin, and Purdue, and it was a triangular swim meet. And I came back to the basketball game maybe with 10 minutes to go in the game. I stayed over at halftime and a little bit longer over at the swim meet. And I know I was criticized in the paper for not being committed to men's basketball, not being committed to the sport as I should be. And I responded to the reporter that I said, you know what, I don't call any timeouts. I don't make any substitutions. I don't call any plays. And I said, most importantly, I'm the AD of the swimmers too, and they have a right to see me. And so that was just kind of my mentality. Rightly or wrongly, that's who I was. And I don't know if you can do that today, very honestly, in respect to Mark Coyle. I think it's become more of stay at the halftime and talk to the donors and stay at the aspect. I mean, I think that's more significant today than it even was when I was the athletic director.
Joe, you mentioned that when you arrived, there were two departments. There was the women's athletic department, there was the men's athletic department, and it was your responsibility to merge the two. And I recall there was a lot of resistance to that at the time, but yes, nonetheless, you had to bring all of that under one umbrella. Tell us a little bit about that process and what that was like and how you managed the process to success.
Well, again, I knew what I was getting into being a Gopher, even though I'd been gone for a long time. I also knew that we had two successful departments. The men's department was successful on its own. The women's department was successful on its own. But they, for the most part, did not do much together. And I'm told there was a lot of angst and animosity between them. That I was not here to witness that, but that's what I'm told. And so I knew when I came, and I tried to share it openly to not only the athletes and the staff and the coaches and the donors that, you know what, I'm going to make the decision that I believe is best for the University of Minnesota. Please don't judge me as favoring the men or favoring the women, but of course I think somebody was always keeping a score sheet to figure out which one, any decision I made, which persons I may have more benefited, and I'm respectful of that. But President Brunix was my boss, and we did a lot together in the strategizing this. We hired a consultant to assist us. We had to develop a new mission statement, new vision, new values, new strategic initiatives, new policies, new procedures, oftentimes merging the two that we had. And quite frankly, it took about 18 months for us to do this. But I think what we did do right was we involved everybody in the process. We had student athletes on each of the committees. We had coaches and staff members. We had people on campus. We had alumni and so forth on different aspects of these different committees. And so it wasn't Joel Maturi's plan, strategic initiative, it was ours. And I'm going to go back and tell you that I think it's successful because of the student athletes. They're the ones who were elated to be in the weight room together, to be elated to go to the same training room, to see somebody in the sports medicine office, to do things together and to cheer each other on rather than to be separate. When I first attended games, for example, if the Gopher men were playing Saturday afternoon in basketball and the women were playing at night, they didn't announce that the women had a game at night, even though it's the same department. We'd go to the women's game that night, they didn't announce that the men won that afternoon. You know, it sounds crazy, but that's how separate they were. We started doing that. We started celebrating each other's successes. And I think, as I said, the athletes took on to that in a heartbeat. And I think the coaches followed, and with that, came the boosters and others. And probably the thing I'm most proud of is now, 16 years since that arrival, many people, even people who were there, forgot that we were separate. And that's probably the best compliment of all.
Well, you were the right person for that mix to be able to merge two departments together. There's
I
no
hope you
doubt
had a vote
in
to
my
that.
mind
That's good.
and Patrick's mind. I mean, I can't think of anybody better to be able to do that. And now your name is on the pavilion. It's called the Joe Maturi University Sports Pavilion, and that was dedicated about a year ago. It was named in your honor for your commitment to the university, and I think it was named because of what you just talked about, helping merge the departments and being aggressive and being at all these different events throughout the sports calendar at the University of Minnesota. How does that feel for you? I always wanted to ask this question. How does that feel when you walk in and you see your name on the pavilion?
I'm not sure what the word surreal means, but I think that's probably the right word to use. It's obviously humbling. I think my wife put it best. She had had hip surgery when President Kaler told me about this tremendous honor, and I got home from that gathering and told her, and she looked me in the eye and she said, "I thought you had to be dead to have a building named after you." And you know what? Maybe there's a reason for that, because it is surreal to do it. But I'm honored that the university is recognizing a decade of cultural change. You know, the word culture is significant. You know, certainly PJ's used it a lot, as well as do most coaches in today's world. And I think we did change it because we merged it. It's not that anything was bad before, but I think we've merged it and established a new culture. And I think the credit goes to, again, those athletes, coaches, staff, certainly the alumni and the donors that have made this possible. And so I said at that ceremony that I would hope that anybody who walks in there feels that that might be my name on it, but it's partly theirs too, because that's what we did accomplish.
Well deserved.
Yeah, no question about it, Joel. I think it's a very, very well-deserved honor, and you spoke earlier about your legacy maybe being Tim Brewster. I think your legacy is a whole lot different than that, and it's the fact that your name is on that building really speaks to what you accomplished at the U and how people feel about you.
Thank you.
Joel, you were at the University of Wisconsin when that program really started to turn around. You know, for many years, Wisconsin was sort of the dregs of the Big Ten. They weren't very successful in any sports. But that changed. Wisconsin also has a reputation of being a great academic institution.
It does.
Why do you think Wisconsin has been able to turn it around and have the success that they've had both on the field and in the classroom, while the University of Minnesota, at least athletically, hasn't had that same level of success?
Well, again, I'm glad you asked that question, because I struggle with it sometimes, because if you look at our athletic department is actually more successful than the University of Wisconsin's. We finish higher in the Director's Cup, which is a national recognition of overall athletic success. We have a border battle, which every sport is worth 40 points. If they beat us in football, which they did 13 consecutive years, thank the Coach Fleck and this year's athletes for changing that, but for 13 years they got 40 points. But also if we, beat them in swimming and diving, we got 40 points, so that's what it is. And I think the Gophers have won, I think, like 6 of the last 7 border battle trophies. So from the standpoint of an athletic department, people tend to not realize, because let's be honest, we have not won in football until this year, and we've struggled in men's basketball for the most part for these last 10, 15 years as well. But to really directly answer your question, it's the right people. I was there when they hired Chancellor Shalala, Donna Shalala, who came to the University of Wisconsin and said that athletics was going to be an important part of that turnaround of that institution. She was significantly there. She convinced Pat Richter, who was an alum, a successful athlete himself, to become the athletic director. I think he declined 4 times before he took the job. He was a vice president at Oscar Mayer at the time. Hired him. Pat was successful in hiring a guy named Barry Alvarez to be the football coach, and then Stu Jackson and Dick Bennett and Bo Ryan as the basketball coaches, who are outstanding. And I really think it's that aspect that they've had their success, and they've just been able to continue it for the most part by laying that foundation. People forget, because I was there. Barry Alvarez was 1-10 his first year. He was 5-6 his second. He was 5-6 his third. So it didn't happen overnight. And I think Coach Fleck talks about that it takes time, it takes a process, and we're certainly hopeful that he will follow on that same one. Now, his 4th year, he did win the Rose Bowl. So we'll hope we can still have that same dream here.
Absolutely. Mark Coyle is the new athletic director at the University of Minnesota, and he worked under your regime when you were there. Tell us a little bit about working with him and your thoughts of him being the athletic director, and do you talk to him on a regular basis about issues that face collegiate athletics?
Well, Mark was on the men's side when I arrived, and one of the difficult challenges I had was because I had two directors of everything. I had a director of men's marketing, a director of women's, a director of, men's facility, everything. We had two of everything, and I had to designate one person, and I ended up designating Mark to oversee the men and the women in his particular area, made him an associate athletic director. I think he's always been thankful for that, and we've continued in contact even when he left and went to Kentucky and then to Boise and then to Syracuse, and delighted that he's our athletic director here at the University of Minnesota. Mark and I speak on occasion, we meet on occasion, but always for the most part of his asking, and that's what I said to him. I said, Mark, you're never going to hear me call up and give you any advice. That's not who I am. I understand the job. If I can support you in any way, I'm here to do it. I think he relies mostly on a Mitch Barnhart, who was at Kentucky, who we worked under for many years, who's still an AD. I think he knows some other ADs well that are still in the position that he probably spends more time with than Joel Maturi, fully understandable. But my favorite statement to Mark when I do meet with him is to stay the course. It's not an easy job. Well-meaning people have this idea, other well-meaning people have this idea, and still others have another idea. You've got a media that's not easy to deal with, and I say that respectfully. That's just the reality of being in a pro city, like we are, and you could be easily critical. And so I just say to stay the course. He's a great value person. He's got great integrity. He's been there, done that, and I think he's doing a wonderful job. And so I'm here to be a support to Mark Coyle.
Joe, you mentioned the criticism that sometimes comes with the job. Being an athletic director at a major university means that there are going to be some arrows coming your way from the media, from donors, from alumni. How did you personally manage that process? And when something negative was written about you, and oftentimes it wasn't true.
I'm human, and so it's never easy to be criticized, especially if it's inaccurate. Now, again, as you and I have shared, I mean, if somebody wants to call me an idiot, they can do that because that's subjective, and they're allowed to say that. But when they get the facts wrong about you're an idiot because you did this for this reason and they're not right, that was the biggest struggle, which I think led to us to try to do what we could to communicate beforehand why we're doing what we're doing and how we're doing things. Sometimes you can't, but oftentimes I think that still comes down to that. That's your expertise. You guys know what you're doing and the reasons for that. I was fortunate when I came to Minnesota. My kids were adult children already. It doesn't mean that they weren't hurt, but they weren't as impacted by the negativity as I think even Mark's children are. I mean, his kids are in high school and middle school, and that bothers them when Dad's being criticized even a little bit more. And so for me, I was blessed. I would say, and this is being honest with you, I did not read the paper purposefully, but I wasn't naive to it, and I would tell people on my staff, if there's something I need to see, positive or negative, you make sure I see it. I mean, that's okay. But I didn't do it. I really didn't listen to the talk shows. I didn't need the free advice that they were so willing to give to me. And again, not that I'm not respectful of who they are and what they're trying to do, but I think that's another change, Patrick, that we see today. I mean, the instant communication, the blogging and this Twittering and everything that's going on. It's just changed everything that we do. And today, in my mind, sometimes media wants to say it first, not necessarily accurately, and because they don't have time to. They want to be the first one to get it out there. And so as a result, doesn't mean they always mean to be inaccurate, but they don't quite have the time. It used to be in your business that you had to have two sources of identifying that what you're going to say was accurate. That's gone out the window a long time ago. And I think it's unfortunate. But again, you know what? I know who I am, good or bad. I know how hard I tried, good or bad. And all you can do is be as good as you can be.
There's so many factions that you have to deal with as an athletic director. You have alumni, you have coaches, you have the student athletes, you have the media that we just discussed, board of regents, the president of the university, donors, and then everybody else. And that's a challenge in itself, just dealing with all those complex areas. And they all have what I would call differing needs from time to time. How did you manage this? And I think this is a key question for anybody that wants to get into sports administration. I mean, you of anybody dealt with it as well as you possibly could under some tough circumstances. How did you deal with it?
Well, first of all, nice you said I dealt with it well. Again, times were different then. And again, I repeat, I was hired at the University of Minnesota, and I remember in my interview process that my job was to merge the departments. My job was to fix the finances. We were projected to be $31 million in debt over the next 7-year period of time. My job was to do what we could to minimize the major infractions, which Minnesota had had a history of having. My job was to improve the academics, which we had not done very well, from our student-athlete perspective prior to that time. Interestingly enough, during my interview process, they didn't talk about winning in football. They didn't talk about doing that or whatever it is. I think that's changed. I mean, Mark Coyle, I think that's all part of his interview process because it's changed, because the money has changed. We did not have a Big Ten network. We didn't have all those kinds of dollars. And so my emphasis was different. Because we were merging the department, my emphasis was certainly to beginning with the student athletes. I think Mark Coyle would want to say the same thing. I don't know if he can say the same thing or do the same thing quite as easily. On a Friday night before a home football game, it's pretty common for the athletic director to entertain donors, to entertain some media, do things of that nature. I didn't do that. I went to the volleyball game or the soccer game or whatever it might be, partly because of what my needs were, plus I enjoyed it a little bit more in regard to it. I don't think Mark can do the same thing. So the time has changed. It really has. Now you need to keep your bosses happy, obviously, and in my case, President Brunix, and when you're President Kaler, and I think that's what Mark needs to do, which of course obviously is the Board of Regents as well. So I think it's a matter of communicating with them. People ask me about our new president. I guess it might be today. She might be, installed or whatever the terminology is, in regard to it. And people ask me about it, and I said, well, I hope she likes athletics, but I hope she lets the athletic director be the athletic director. I mean, again, I've been involved in environments where, well-meaning presidents are really involved, but they want to make the AD decisions, and yet they're not necessarily in the know to make all those. So I think it's a matter of communication, and it's a matter of making sure that you know what their expectations are and who you are. So you can't solve everybody. No matter what you do with boosters, there's going to be somebody else who's going to want more of your time. No matter what you do with coaches, there's going to be somebody else wants this or wants that. That's nature of the beast. Again, go back to what you do your best.
Joe, we literally have a minute left.
Yes.
This half.
I talked too much.
I mean, amazingly quickly. No, not at all. Quickly tell us a little bit about the Minnesota High School Basketball Hall of Fame and what you're doing to bring that to life.
Well, you know what? I got involved because my high school coach had a great impact on me. Coach Bob McDonald from Chisholm, winningest coach in the history of Minnesota basketball. I played on his first 2 teams. As I say, he would have won his 1,000th game a lot earlier if I didn't play on his first 2 teams, but that's another story in itself. And so I got involved in my retirement because of it. And we started, we're only the second state in the country to do this. A lot of people have coaches' Hall of Fames, but our Hall of Fame is for athletes, high school athletes, former, coaches, media people, administrators, officials, anybody who has had a great positive impact on high school basketball in the state of Minnesota, which has a rich history. Had our first induction a year ago. We're going to have our second one this coming March, and I'm honored to be just a small part of trying to make that work.
Fantastic. Joel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Bill and I are personally honored that you took the time and joined us.
Well, you're 2 good friends that I treasure.
And thank you for watching Behind the Game. See you next time.